Kia ora koutou, ko Francois toku inoa, no wiwi aho. Thanks for joining us for this webinar about sustainability in the FMCG industry. With new compliances coming into play and the rise for the need of supply chain greenhouse gas measurement, this is a topic of growing importance. My name is Francois. After a couple of years in the late 90s in France in environmental education, I spent more than 20 years in hospitality and wholesale. I had a couple of cafes myself in Wellington, and in wholesale, I was focusing on hospitality and FMCG. Therefore, at Toitu, I look after the retail, the wholesale, and the food manufacturing sector. Toitu was created under Manaki Fenua, Land Care Research, more than 20 years ago, and since then, I've been doing carbon and environmental certification. Joining me today for this webinar are Diana Hawkins, our senior advisor in the primary sector and waste, and Sophie Matthews, the Group Quality and Compliance Manager for WineWorks, which is an organization who's Toitu Carbon Zero certified. I'll start with a bit of the context of sustainability in FMCG, and then Diana will walk us through the lifecycle hotspots, and Sophie will share the challenges they have faced in sustainability and the journey through certification. So first and foremost, why are we here? Why is it important? Kantar recently surveyed more than 1,500 New Zealanders for their annual Better Future reports, and climate change was front of mind for 50% of people. You can see since 2011, a steady climb in concern from people about climate change. Obviously, in 2020, there was a huge dip. Most people were concerned about something else, but it shoot up right back up in 2021. The slight slump in the last couple of years could be potentially attributed to the rise of the cost of living. However, 50% of Kiwis caring about climate change mean that all things being equal, every second person you're interacting with is concerned about climate change. That could be your clients, that could be your supplier, your stakeholder, and of course, your employee. So this is something you need to take care. Now, why should you care and why should you measure and reduce your greenhouse gas emission? And there are a few reasons why companies should strive to reduce their impact and their greenhouse gas emission. First of all, regulation. Most banks now are issuing sustainability-linked loans, and there are international and domestic compliances. When we talk about domestic compliances, we're thinking mostly about the Climate Change Response Amendment Act of 2019, which set clear targets for New Zealand to achieve by 2030 and 2050 in order to be able to stay under the 1.5 degrees climate change. When we talk about international compliances, for example, the EU just passed a law that by 2026, all companies making claims around sustainability will need to have those backed up by a third party. Though this is to avoid greenwashing, obviously. Secondly, the market driver. That could be your supply chain, and that could be your wholesaler, retailer, or export regulation, as we just talked about. But I would like to highlight one in particular in New Zealand, which is the Climate Reporting Entities, or CREs. Those, by next year, depending where their financial year ends, will have to start reporting on the greenhouse gas emission of their supply chain. Therefore, if you are part of their value chain, if you are supplying a CRE, you will have to start reporting on those. When we talk about consumer expectation, you could see on the following slides some of Toitu clients who are involved in the FMCG sector. Last year, Circana did a report on companies who had a clear sustainability plan. Those companies have showed a value growth of 5% and a unit growth of more than 3% above the companies who do not have a clear sustainability plan, and that is despite the rising cost of living. Those numbers are not negligible, and as a decision maker, you need to factor them in. Finally, you have your internal drivers. That could be your marketing, because of course, that is, whatever you do around certification is marketable. That could be reducing risk, or that could be potential savings. One thing I generally remind people is if you are reducing your emissions, most of the time you are reducing your OPEX. So that's something in the current climate you need to keep in mind too. I'm not going to pass you on to Diana, who's going to walk us through the life cycle hotspots and how to mitigate emission within that life cycles. Over to you, Diana.
Thanks, Francois. So as Francois mentioned, I'm Diana Hawkins. I work on our science and advisory team focusing on primary sector and waste. I work very closely with our FMCG clients and those undergoing product certification. I also have extensive experience in the wine and beverage industry and a background in engineering. So you may be wondering how much FMCG emits compared to other industries. According to StatNZ's 2022 Greenhouse Gas Emissions Report, goods producing industries, including FMCG, contribute 25% to Aotearoa's overall industry emissions. However, most indirect emission sources for FMCG are from raw materials in the agriculture, forestry, and fishing sector. These account for the majority of the country's greenhouse gas emissions from industry. This is important because most of a company's indirect emission sources are within their value chain, which we'll detail in the next slide. For example, the manufacturing of food and beverage contributes about 4% of New Zealand's total carbon footprint, excluding agriculture, horticulture, or aquaculture. However, if we were to include horticulture and farming, it would roughly equate to an additional 55%. This is why identifying and tackling hotspots within your product's value chain is so important. So there are a few different ways of measuring your carbon emissions. You can measure the emissions associated with your products and services using a full life cycle approach, which is detailed in blue. This means measuring your upstream activities like raw material sourcing and supply freight, core manufacturing activities, and downstream activities, which includes distribution, use, and disposal. You can also measure your operational emissions, which are those associated with your organization and indicated in the green box on the slide. This includes core manufacturing, as well as other processes such as waste, freight, business travel, refrigerant, and fuels. As you can see, there is overlap between a product and organization carbon footprint. This overlap will only increase as companies move to measuring their full value chain emissions, which are also called Scope 3 emissions. So when looking at your product footprint, you can further define the boundary as cradle to gate, which encompasses all your upstream and core emissions, but does not take downstream emissions into account. Or you can look at cradle to grave emissions for your products and services, which encompass all life cycle stages, including distribution, use, and disposal. Another way to view this from an organizational perspective is by thinking of it as mapping all of the emissions within your value chain. So here's an example of what this looks like for a winery who does not own any vineyards. The winery has direct ownership and control of the items in purple. This forms their organization inventory and covers their operational emissions. The items in blue are activities they do not own. However, these emission sources can be considered their carbon shadow as they are still within the winery sphere of influence. This is known as their value chain or product emissions. These activities incorporated when viewing this from a cradle to grave perspective, which includes the emissions associated with growing the grapes as well as operational emissions. And this is what it would look like for cradle to grave, which includes distribution to the end consumer, as well as the electricity used to chill the wine and disposal of the packaging. So now that you have a better understanding of the emission sources associated with operational and product emissions, we'll now chat about ways you can reduce your emissions within your value chain and some of the hotspots for FMCG. So it's important to remember that everyone is on this journey together, and by engaging with your suppliers, you can reduce both of your carbon footprints. Some ways you can do this are by talking directly with your suppliers about each of your sustainability goals and how you can work towards those goals together. If you are still developing your supplier relationships, a great place to start is by setting supplier engagement targets. You can also build sustainability goals directly into your supplier agreements. And once you've got a dialogue going, you can work with them to get supplier-specific emission factors and information, and to set emissions reduction targets for things like supply freight, electricity, fuel consumption, and material sourcing. For example, Silver Fern Farms holds TOY2 Net Carbon Zero product and organization certifications. They set standards within their supply chain to reduce their emissions and work directly with their farmers to reduce on-farm emissions, which is one of their major emission sources. They have 40 farms participating in a customized program to support enhanced on-farm biodiversity. They also have a roadmap going forward to continue reducing their carbon emissions, which includes initiatives like not using coal in their processing and working with their transport and logistics partners to reduce emissions. So manufacturing emission sources are usually activities you have direct control over. You can avoid energy-hungry processes and shift to using renewable energy whenever possible. Improving efficiency also has both economic and emission reduction benefits by requiring less energy to produce goods. Another area you can drive impact is at the design stage. By thinking about emissions and waste reductions early on in the process, you can design out waste and design in circularity, which encourages reusing, repairing, and repurposing your products and packaging. One way our client EcoStore did this is mapping their emissions to help them understand where the opportunities were for emissions reductions, including within their product and value chain. They then decided to transition their forklifts from LPG to electric, and also took steps to handle and process materials as efficiently as possible to reduce electricity, which then reduced their emissions. So transport is another FMCG emissions hotspot. This goes for raw material packaging, transport during manufacturing processes, and finished good transport. You can reduce emissions by exploring domestic sourcing and transport options. And when you do source or send things overseas, you can optimize shipping routes, and if you're able, use green fleets to reduce those emissions. Increasing the amount of goods stored in a container or on a pallet can help as well. For example, if you ship a container with 150 items instead of 100, this can help reduce your emissions by increasing transport efficiency. If you can't fit any more items into the container, lightweighting your packaging can also help reduce your emissions, since the lighter things are, the less energy it takes to transport them. Our client in Cafe said that, in general, everything you do to reduce emissions will probably improve your efficiency as a business. The two go hand in hand. Some things are more expensive, but in general, the savings and efficiency outweighs the cost. So they book the most direct route for their coffee, which tends to be more expensive, but they do it because it means they have less emissions, and it also allows them to have less stock held here in Aotearoa and reduces the risk of the quality being affected in transit. These efficiencies go hand in hand. Because of efficiencies like this, their emissions per ton of coffee sold is very low by international standards. So just like it's important to engage with your suppliers, it's equally important to engage with your distribution partners, retailers, and end customers. By doing this, you can work together to reduce the energy it takes to store and use your products. The waste associated with unsold goods can also drive up emissions. This is especially true for food waste, which makes up almost 10% of worldwide agricultural emissions, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN. Waste reductions can be achieved by forecasting and right-sizing inventories and increasing circularity. Letting consumers know what they can do can also go a long way in reducing your downstream emissions. This usually takes the form of educating and informing consumers of ways they can change their behavior or how they can use and interact with your products to reduce emissions. A great example of this is Emma Lewisham's TOY2 Climate Positive certified products, which promote circular beauty. Their skincare range is designed to be refilled, reducing carbon emissions. After purchasing a jar or a bottle once, customers can then refill it again and again. They communicate this in the packaging their items are delivered in and on their website. They even have a reward system to encourage this behavior. This makes it really easy for their customers to know how to do their part. Consumers are able to retain the luxury product experience that Evolution offers, but with less impact on our planet. So now that I've gone over a few of the FMCG hotspots and some ways you can reduce those emissions, I'll discuss how emissions are calculated in the first place and what levers you can use to reduce them. So it's important to keep the mitigation hierarchy top of mind. The first step in that hierarchy is to avoid creating the emissions in the first place wherever possible. If the emissions are unable to be avoided, it's then important to reduce the emissions. A great example of this is switching from a petrol-powered car to a hybrid or an electric vehicle. And then anything that you aren't able to avoid entirely or reduce, you can then compensate for. And this can be done via offsets like carbon credits or removal such as tree sequestration. And it's the right combination of emissions avoidance, reduction, and offsetting that can help you achieve your climate goals. So it's now time to talk about how emissions are calculated to begin with. The overall greenhouse gas impact of an activity that you have will be equal to the activity level multiplied by the greenhouse gas intensity level. The activity and greenhouse gas intensity are your key levers to decarbonize. The activity lever can be translated into a behavioral change. For example, reduce the amount of packaging used. The greenhouse gas lever can be equated to a technological change. In this example, that could be switching to a lighter weight glass bottle. Another example of how you can use these two levers together is via optimizing shipping routes like in-cafe, so the product is transported over a shorter distance. And then you can also substitute highly intensive freight, such as air freight, with less intensive freight options, such as ocean shipping. By using both levers together, you can achieve the greatest emissions reduction. So I hope this gives you a better understanding of how emissions are calculated and ways to reduce them. That concludes my presentation on identifying and tackling product hotspots, and I'll now hand things back over to Francois.
Thanks a lot, Diana, for those insights. I personally always like to remind client or prospective client about the mitigation hierarchy. It's a very useful tool. I'm now going to pass over to Sophie Matthews from WineWorks. Sophie is a qualified winemaker with a robust background in viticulture and now leads the food safety and compliance efforts at WineWorks. WineWorks have been tied to net carbon zero certified for 4 years now and are consistently implementing initiatives to reduce their carbon footprint. Over to you, Sophie.
Okay. WineWorks is a contract wine bottling company based in Auckland, Hawke's Bay and Marlborough. We bottle clients' wine from all over New Zealand and have been an integral part of the industry for close to 30 years. Our services include collecting wine from our clients' wineries and having it piped in under the road from our neighbouring properties. Once on site, we bottle, package, store and dispatch the finished goods to both domestic and international markets. We have 10 bottling lines of various speeds across our group. For some context of the complexity of our business, when factoring in all of the dry goods from bottles, caps, dividers and labels, we're handling over 1 billion units of dry goods per year across approximately 30,000 SKUs. Because we're a contract facility, everything we do is based around our client requests, and this isn't just limited to production requirements. It also extends to our compliance certifications for market access. Historically, this has been food safety predominantly, but in recent years, there has been growing demand for environmental sustainability to be measured and certified also. In 2019, the board of directors and our CEO made the decision to get ahead of the changes that we could see coming, and so we signed up with Toy 2. So some quick stats to give you the context of what I'll be talking about in a moment. 45% of wine industry carbon emissions come from the packaging of wine. Therefore, we and other dry goods suppliers can have a major impact of decarbonising the wine industry. Our boundary from our reporting goes from the receipt of wine to the dispatch of the final product, and it includes goods that we purchase on behalf of the client. Any goods purchased and delivered to us by our clients are not included. Our Scope 3 boundary includes the supply chain goods both up and downstream that we purchase either for our company or on behalf of the client. In the 3 years since our base year reporting in 2020, we have cut our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 45%. We have been able to achieve this result through many different initiatives, and I'll highlight some of the larger ones, but also some of the smaller ones that all team members can get involved with. To start, our biggest and easiest one was changing our electricity supply. We moved to ecotricity for our North Island-based sites. They are Toitū certified renewable energy, so this was a really easy choice. Our South Island site is now with Meridian, and they purchase RECs on our behalf. As well as this, we have also had consultants into the business to review our production processes to determine the greatest sinks of energy. Where this has been feasible, we have either reduced the reliance on these pieces of equipment, removed them and replaced them, or are phasing them out over time. We've also replaced or put in new LED efficient lighting with movement sensors, so they turn off when no one's in the warehouse. An easy way to ensure that sustainability is kept front of mind is when making new purchases. For us, this has been simply to include a sustainability section in our CapEx forms. This ensures that it is considered for all new large purchases. We also looked at other practices, such as the IT team encouraging everyone to turn off their computers at the end of the week. It might seem like a really small thing in the scheme of things, but changing habits such as this can flow on into other areas. You'd be surprised by how many people actually don't turn them off. In the industry, we also use a lot of carbon dioxide as gas cover to prevent oxidation. It's very effective, but when thinking about it, it seems counterintuitive when we're trying to reduce or eliminate it. When the carbon dioxide shortage happened 18 months ago, it forced us into looking at alternatives. Nitrogen has always been an accepted alternative, but not the industry favourite, as it was seen as being less effective. The testing that we carried out at the time has since shown us otherwise, and we now have removed all CO2 from our production, other than what we use for making sparkling wine, of course. We have had to make some investment through the purchase of new nitrogen generators, but these are so much more efficient that the electricity use is also down. We're also now using nitrogen to rinse bottles that come in. This was previously done all by water. We've implemented this across all lines and have reduced water consumption considerably. At 2 of our sites, we had previously required diesel trucks to move pallets of wine from the end of production to warehousing. This can be at the other end of the site or even across a creek in Marlborough. The Marlborough site got their first electric tug and trailer 2 years ago and has been very successful. We have also recently opened up the walls between the production hall and the warehouse in Auckland. This has allowed us to be able to take finished products right through to the end of the warehousing, all under cover. This also reduces the time it takes to move product, so we've been gaining efficiencies as well through that. It's always welcome. We've also had a significant reduction in waste to landfill over the past few years. Examples of how we have approached this has been through visual reporting, such as what is on the screen. It's an easy visual for all team members to understand, showing the numbers of skip bins that are removed from the site each year that go to landfill. The reductions we have had are not only our team understanding what is actual waste, but what can also be repurposed or recycled too. We've also worked with our larger suppliers to ensure the packaging sent to us is easily recycled or used for other purposes. So some of our team members have even been known to take the wooden packaging from our new bottling lines home to construct kids' cubbies and bike sheds. Lots of ways. Another easy way to help our team recycle is by having the right bins in the right places. By conducting an audit of where people were throwing away recyclable material into waste bins, it was easy to add a couple of dedicated recycling bins into those areas, such as administration, client lounges, and meeting rooms. So where are we going in the future? We have set further targets to continue to reduce our emissions. These align to the science-based targets, but also to the new roadmap that is being released in August by our industry body, New Zealand Wine. The intention is for the industry to be carbon zero by 2050. To reach these targets, our next major focus is going to be with our supply chain partners. Our Scope 3 emissions are an area that we haven't made much progress in yet, but with the changes coming to reporting, we are focusing on these in much more detail. We already have a close relationship with freight, logistics and shipping partners such as CEL and Port Nelson with our Marlborough site and Visy Logistics in Auckland. Each of our companies work together in many aspects of business already, and this is now flowing through to our alignment with our collective sustainability goals. The more detail each of us can provide for our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions to each other means the more accurately we can report our Scope 3 emissions. We've also started working with other dry goods suppliers, especially glass manufacturers, to understand their emissions. They are also working on their own projects, such as lightweighting their bottles to reduce the weight of freight being sent overseas. There are many areas of the supply chain where we can have an influence for our industry. It's a matter of understanding the potential impact of each of these and then focusing on a couple of those projects or suppliers at a time to ensure anything that can be introduced is done in a manner that will last. Finally, outside of emission reporting, we're also encouraging our teams to get involved in community projects by giving them time off to go help with planting natives, such as the tomato trust tree planting in the Hawke's Bay, or by removing wilding pines in the back hills of Marlborough. The Auckland team have also been cleaning up reserve areas around the district as well. We've also started planting trees on behalf of our clients when they complete surveys for us and at our Hawke's Bay site as a replacement for the Christmas gifts that we used to send out to them. So thank you all for listening to how we've approached environmental sustainability at WineWorks, and hopefully there's a couple of ideas that you can take away to use from that.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was extremely insightful. I find it especially impressive the fact that since 2020, you have reduced your Scope 1 and 2 by 45%. That's incredible. Well done on that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We're proud.
Yeah, you should. And I'm glad to hear that Toitu was able to support WineWorks its certification. I'll just go over a couple of more benefits from our certification before we move to the Q&As. Obviously, being certified means that you get third-party verification, as we talked at the top of this webinar. This avoids perception or accusation of greenwashing. At this stage, in Australia and New Zealand, we are still the only one who can do certification who are ISO-aligned accreditation. ISO standards are the highest international standards, and therefore, this is where our certification and the people who are holding credibility lies into. On top of that, most people might not know who Toitu is, but most people know what ISO standards are. Ultimately, you need to use it for markets. So you want to do the right thing, of course, as a company, for people and the planet. But at the end of the day, you're running a business and it has to make sense business-wise. So for example, you might be answering tenders, and most of those days have a chapter on sustainability. You might have already faced questions from your value chain about what you're doing in that field. And of course, as we talked a few times about the growing consumer expectation. Finally, at a time when people in businesses are very careful to where they put their money, you want to be seen, like WineWorks, as a company who's ready to face the challenges of the future. In short, you want to be seen as a leader rather than a follower. Thank you very much. That concludes the part of us talking. And we will now move on to Q&As. For agriculture and farming, do you have emission figures for cradle to table? Diana, can you answer that?
Yeah, I can share one of the stats I have. This is from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. And so global food systems, including farming and land use, livestock production, household food consumption and waste, and energy used in the farm and food retail sectors, account for 31% of human-made greenhouse gas emissions globally. So I hope that helps answer that one.
Thanks for that. And thanks for the question. There's another one maybe you can help with, which is, can you please expand on the Silverfern Farms net zero carbon by nature claims?
Yeah, so I think for that one, I will also refer people to their website. It's quite detailed in their presentation of the net carbon zero by nature. They are Toitū certified with their carbon products as net carbon zero, and they're using sequestration and removals, which are also referred to as insets, to neutralize the emissions associated with their products from cradle to grave.
Thanks for that. And it kind of already answered the third one, which was, does Toitū have a calculator for sequestration? The simple answer of that is yes, we do. And it's taken into account, especially for farming, as Diana just mentioned. I think the next one might be for you, Sophie. Why no solar system on the large roof?
A solar system. We have had a study, so I had a consultant come in and do a study on that. It wasn't feasible at the time. That was a couple of years ago, and that's when we were changing over to Ecotricity and Meridian. So it was better for us to do that change and put in solar at the time, but it's not out of the question in the future.
Thanks for that. The next one might be a bit... we'll try to give it a go. From what I understand, New Zealand has an extremely low carbon impact compared to the largest carbon emitting countries. However, New Zealand carbon per capita is in the top 10. Are you able to illustrate why this is in the case and where the biggest impact is derived? I might first point out the number of people there are in New Zealand. Compared to, for example, where I'm coming from. So if you divide it per capita, you will have obviously potentially higher impact. But Diana?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, and then if we need, we can answer offline too. But basically, I think the low CO2 compared to other countries is due to our electricity grid. So the electricity grid in New Zealand is predominantly renewable energy. However, in other countries, it's still being, electricity is still being produced using fossil fuels. And so in some areas, that's why New Zealand has kind of a better grid mix, so our emissions can be perceived as lower. However, when you're talking about per capita emissions overall, usually that takes into account the agricultural emissions associated with the animals and methane. Methane is a bit of a more intensive greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So that typically is what's driving our overall emissions higher compared to some other countries per capita. So if you want to elaborate on that question, I can provide a more detailed answer, but I think that may be what you're asking about.
Cool. The next one start by congratulations, Sophie, for the case study. And what year is your baseline and what figure are you now reporting compared to that baseline? I think I have the answer to the both, but I'll let you reply.
Yeah, so our base year was the 2019 to 2020 financial year. So it was obviously 4 years ago now, but our audit last year had us at 45% down from our base year.
Awesome. Have the WineWorks leadership always been engaged with Toitū certification, or did Sophie has to engage with them and share about the benefits?
Sure. So our CEO was the driver of this right from day one, and I wasn't actually involved at that point. I only came on board about a year ago into environmental sustainability side of compliance. My background's in food safety, so it's relatively new for me, but it's always been driven by our senior management team, and now we have also a group of people who get together from each of the sites, and they're our sort of sustainability champions for each of our sites. They're the ones who go and look at all the waste bins and make sure people are actually recycling, for instance. So, yeah, but no, it's always been driven by our board and CEO.
Awesome. The next one will be partly probably, I'll give it a go first, and then Sophie, you can elaborate on it. You mentioned WineWorks was net carbon certified. Are you using emission offset to achieve this? If so, can you please provide some further information? So for our carbon zero certification in general, the way the claim will be is you always will have your gross emission. The company still emit carbon, but you're offsetting it with carbon credit in order to achieve carbon zero. That's how it works. But maybe you want to expand a bit more on the carbon credit potentially, Sophie, that you guys have purchased?
Sure. So we chose after the second year to start offsetting. This was largely driven by client requests. So most of what we do is driven by what our clients are requiring, especially for market access. So we have been offsetting for the last 3 years, and it seems to be working for us. It's always through Toitu as well. So we purchase through the right methods. Yeah.
The next one, this question is not specific to FMCG, but does Toitu have data or case study that would help to demonstrate how sustainability produced clothing can reduce OPEX or have commercial advantages? Maybe, I don't know if Diana, you want to have a quick go, but I can start by saying we might need a bit more details on that, of what you mean by sustainably produced. If, for example, you talk about local transport, scope 3 would be a clear one, obviously, in which you would reduce your OPEX and your emissions. Diana, do you have any example around closing?
I do, mostly from kind of like a waste reduction standpoint, just because, especially fast fashion, it's one of the really environmentally intensive industries, as people are probably aware. The piles of clothes in the desert, and the Atacama, I believe, in Chile is where they're dumping it all, and just kind of everywhere, just because there's a lot of excess clothing that gets produced. So I think anytime where you are designing things with circular concepts, so designing out waste, producing on demand to avoid excess stock, that can reduce the cost that you incur producing that item in the first place. Promoting repair policies and things like that, and higher quality clothing. In terms of commercial advantages, consumers are looking for more of that. Most are aware that fast fashion is a bit problematic. And so ways that you can demonstrate that you are being part of the solution. As Francois mentioned, consumers are very conscious of the things that they're purchasing. They want them to be environmentally sustainable. So I think that can provide a commercial advantage. But in terms of operational expenditure, I think we need more details on kind of what initiatives you're referring to. But I hope that helps. But yeah.
No, thanks. Can you share any more real-life example of where FMCG businesses have taken climate action and any successes they've seen from it? I'll start, and if you want to add anything, Diana, after. The one thing I would actually point out is the one who's coming in the future and not so long future. Foodstuff last year became very publicly saying that in the medium term, they will have to understand their supply chain greenhouse gas emission, which means that everybody involved will have to start to have an idea of their own emissions, if that makes sense. And so therefore, they will definitely force some reduction action from that. I don't know if you want to expand on that one, Diana? Or?
I think another example I could give is just with some supplier engagement. So a lot of companies set supplier engagement targets to help work with people in their value chain to reduce their emissions. One client of ours actually went to their supplier in China and started talking to them about, can you switch your electricity provider to something a bit more sustainable? They're exploring renewable energy certificates and things like that. And so I think those conversations are still ongoing, but I think that it's a really good demonstration of successes that you can have just by engaging with your suppliers. They were quite keen. It's just a matter of getting it all kind of pieced together for next year.
One for you, Sophie. Does WineWorks also account for emission associated with the consumption of their product by consumer and use of the product sold? I might start just to point out the difference that Diana highlighted during the life cycle of the difference between certifying an organization and its boundaries compared to certifying a product from cradle to gate or cradle to grave. Maybe, Sophie, you want to expand on that?
No, so this is what we don't at the moment. There's potential for us to help the industry do that. Because we don't own any of the product, it makes it tricky for us to understand that. So we're in a contract space. everything that's coming through our sites is owned by multiple wineries and multiple businesses. So that would be part of their life cycle analysis. But we're also in a position where we see a fair chunk of the industry and the supply chain. So there's potential for us to help our clients understand where we fit and where the other parts of our supply chain flowing into us fits as well. So we can help with it, but we're not specifically looking at that ourselves.
Cool. Thanks a lot for that. That's going to be an interesting question. Why did WineWorks choose Meridian instead of Ecotricity in the South Island?
Easy answer to that. Ecotricity isn't in the South Island, so we had to find someone else. And Meridian were able to help us with the REC, so that's why we've gone with them there.
Okay, thanks for that. What targets have WineWorks set? Do they have some on their emission? Do you have any?
So, well, our first 3 years, we had a target of 30% reduction. We just went, let's go for it, let's try, see where we can get to. And we ended up getting to 45%. So kind of smashed the target and got it done. So we're obviously not far from the science-based target. So from there, basically, we're now looking at, okay, we're on track, we're getting lower and we're reducing. We will keep reducing where we can. To be fair, it is getting harder because we've done a lot of those big easy ones to begin with, which is where you should start, get some traction. With the next phase, we're going to just start looking a little bit deeper, and part of that will come with our scope 3 engagement with our supply chain as well. That's where we're going to see across the industry and not just necessarily WineWorks our biggest gains in the next few years, I believe.
Sweet, thanks a lot for that. Thanks, Tony. For the next one is more like great presentation. Sophie and Diana, I think that was for you. Thank you very much. Is TOY 2 certificate accepted in the EU rules? We have a partner in the EU called Achilles who can implement our certification. So the answer is yes on that. What TOY 2 feels for the direction the FMCG sector is heading? Are we going to reach 1.5 degree target? The 1.5 degree target is obviously a global target and a national one to play its part for New Zealand. The other thing around it is probably to keep in mind that the FMCG sector will be influenced by its actors. And as I mentioned, the thing like foodstuff, wanted to understand their suppliers' greenhouse gas emission will definitely help with that. Is there anything you want to add, Diana, to that?
No, but I do think that 1.5 degree target is something that everyone is actively working towards. I think both from an international level, domestic level, and industry level, that is the goal is to achieve that. So I think we're hopefully moving in the right direction, that momentum.
I like that optimism. Thank you very much.
You have to be.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
How impacted are New Zealand FMCG businesses already by regulations here and globally, and how quickly do you see this becoming mandatory in order to operate? Well, as I mentioned, if you export into the EU, you have to pay attention to obviously their regulation, especially that new law that I mentioned around greenwashing. And for the local one, the biggest one is the CRE companies. If you're part of their value chain, you will have to report your greenhouse gas very soon. If you have any actors, in your value chain who are on a certification path, within a couple of years, they will have to start reporting on their value chain in order to capture the greenhouse gas for an oil operation. If you're part of the value chain, you will be facing questions. Is there anything else to add to that, Diana?
No, but I do think that you're right. More and more regulations are being released, so it's important to stay on top of those within your market. And it's, I do think I don't know if it's going to be mandatory, but I do think that it is going to start becoming more and more relevant and important. Yeah.
Cool. One more for you, Sophie. are there any specific product WineWorks add that are low carbon and are promoted more to store for sale?
So that comes back to our clients who own the product. It's really up to them how they market those products. I believe there are a couple on the market, and they're likely to be also Toitū certified. And they'll be managing their own supply chain out to market. And whether they do that through offsetting or lower, reducing their own emissions, I'm not sure. But yeah, there are a couple just starting to come through where we're seeing that a little bit more. But again, because we don't own it, we're not promoting it as such on any labels of marketing.
Thank you very much. Coming from the waste industry, FMCG produce a lot of the material that ends up in landfill or even recycling system, which is still an energy and transportation EV process. Do you see companies moving to, or at least considering, genuine circular economy packaging that takes responsibility for the material that make up the packaging? Before I give the floor to either Sophie or Diana, the one thing I would point out, and I'll come back to food stuff, is they just employed one of the leading experts in New Zealand around circular economy. So they are taking, clearly foodstuff is taking that in account, and hopefully they will be seeing some steps toward that. Any of you ladies want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think extended producer responsibility is something that is very often discussed about FMCG. So really taking ownership of the product, throughout the value chain, not just it's sold to a consumer, so I don't, care what happens to it after that. And there have actually been some court cases in the US. I believe the state of New York is suing Pepsi at the moment for all the waste they're generating. And if you talk to even local councils here and things like that, the landfills are filling up. And so they're really trying to reduce the amount of waste coming in. So I think that people or companies are, genuinely considering this now. But I do think that it may be something that regulation also applies to as well. Yeah, in the future.
And if there's anything, Sophie, you want to?
I know that it's being discussed in the industry. I'm not sure we've got any absolute solutions at the moment for it, because of the amount of wine that is exported out to so many countries around the world. It's about looking at those markets and how they're also be able to deal with that waste, those waste streams or recycling, and what they have available. And each market has different requirements as well, because it's an alcoholic product. They might have different schemes in place depending on what market you're selling to. So it's quite complex, and I don't think we've got a solution yet, but I'm sure we'll be working through one to distant future as an industry.
Yep. Can you explain the difference between buying credit via Toitū and versus the government run trading platform? And I'll leave the judgment part out of that one. It's relatively simple. When you buy carbon credit via Toitū, it's through the voluntary market, where the ETS emission trading scheme you're referring to is a mandatory market. Is there something else, Diana, you want to add to that one in particular?
No, I think you covered it. I think they just are really kind of two different purposes. So yeah.
Do customers of WineWorks still need to account the emissions associated with bottling their product, or is this voided as they are net zero certified?
So with this one, we do have quite a few client requests now coming through for what their emissions would be per bottle or per case. So we are reporting that back to clients who are needing to report on that. I believe that would be their scope 3 emissions if they're just looking at their own scope 1 and 2 for their winery. It depends on their boundary, but if they're looking at the full life cycle, then that would be taken into account. I'm not sure technically about the offsetting that we do and how that affects the client. Sorry, I'd have to throw that back to Diana and Francois, but certainly we're able to provide all the information for them to report on.
Diana, is there anything you want to add on that particular one?
Yeah, I think it ultimately depends on what reporting schemes the customer of WineWorks are reporting into, just because each scheme has a different approach potentially for counting those emissions. So WineWorks is measuring their organization emissions and working on their products and services. So in terms of including everything as kind of net zero for the bottling, typically that would be for a product or service certification. So it just kind of depends on the reporting that their customers are doing.
Cool. The next one is very specific to client. Are there growing numbers of emission factors for food and beverage product available to use in eManage, which is our accounting software? And how often are those being updated? We have a whole team who's working on that, on emission factors. And they are probably the most up-to-date emission factors, I'll say, in the game. Diana, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. So there are a number of them in eManage at the moment. We can, it's constantly something that we're adding things to. If there's an emission factor in particular that you're needing, that's something that we can see if we can source. But at the same time, if you can work with your suppliers to get a supplier-specific emission factor for your specific product, that would be ideal. That way you're not using just kind of industry averages, but yeah.
For the next one, Tony, I would just suggest, Tony would like to know if there's further public information on construction best practice. Please send us an email. We got experts in that, and we can point you out. Unless Diana, you want to jump in?
Two things. I think there was a webinar not too long ago on the construction sector, so that should be up on the website. Brands also has some pretty good information, but we do have a team focusing on the built environment here, so we can reach out to them about that too. Yeah.
Cool. Probably one more for you, Diana. Are there any published material to compare the emission between industry and size of organization?
Yes, but I would need to know more details about which comparisons you're looking for. But yeah, we can answer that offline.
Perfect. Awesome. And that's kind of the end of our question. So unless there's any more popping in, we'll end this webinar. I want to thank Sophie and Diana, and of course, the attendees for joining in for this webinar. Ka kite. Have a good Matariki weekend.